So this is video number 4 in our look at the use of the Old Testament in Zechariah's song in Luke 1. So I'm going to reread Zechariah's song and what we've covered thus far, and then we'll get into the next passage, or the next use of the Old Testament. So it goes, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited and redeemed his people, and has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us." So, Advent, as you know, is the time that we focus on many Old Testament prophecies that look forward to the coming of the Messiah. The usual places we turn to are Micah, Micah's prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, or we look at Isaiah 7 with reference to the virgin birth. But there are many, many more Old Testament passages that bear witness to Jesus more than simply just these two passages. These are the two most familiar ones, but there are many Old Testament passages that look forward to the coming of the Messiah. Zechariah praises God for raising up one from the line of David as he promised through the prophets from of old. So today I want to go through a bunch of Old Testament passages to see where the Old Testament predicts one who would come and redeem his people. And we're not just going to look at the prophets, although we'll look at a few places of the prophets. We're going to look at some other places in the Old Testament as well. So I'm going to pull up those passages so that you can see them while we read them. And the first place we're going to look at is actually Genesis 3, where it says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So God created Adam and Eve perfect, as we know, and placed them in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1 and 2. And then Adam and Eve rebel against God. They decide that they want to make up their own rules, be their own king, and not live under God's kingship. And so after humanity rebels, God declares punishments on the serpent, the woman, and the man. And God's punishment on the serpent includes a promise that one day a human would be born from Eve's offspring who would fight against the serpent. And he would bruise the serpent's head, or you would crush the serpent's head. And this man, this person that would come from Eve's line, would not fall prey to temptation in the same way that other humans would. Though humanity would struggle under the reign of sin, this man would come and crush the head of the serpent. He would undo the effects of sin in the world and enable humanity to live out the purposes for which we were created, to live according to the creational design of Genesis 1 and 2. So this is we call it the proto-evangelion, the first gospel of one who would come and crush the head of the serpent. But as we move on in Genesis, we also see these words where it says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." So on his deathbed, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, so there's the promise to Abraham, which we'll talk about soon, and that's passed on to his son Isaac, and then passed on to his son Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons who eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. But on his deathbed, Jacob predicts that a ruler will come from his son Judah's descendants. And one of the themes of Genesis has been to trace the line of the seed, the one who would come from Eve's line, who would crush the serpent and undo the effects of sin. So this descendant would come from Abraham, and then from Isaac, and from Jacob. But Jacob has 12 sons. So which one would carry on that promise to crush the serpent? Jacob makes clear that it will be a king from Judah, from one of Judah's descendants, who would come and crush the serpent. Another passage in Numbers 24 says, "I see him, but not now. I see him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall arise from Israel." So later, Balaam, who's a prophet, says that he sees a star or a king coming from Israel, but he is not near. Now, this prophecy occurred after Israel is redeemed from the promised land, or from the land of Egypt. And as they're moving on toward the promised land, they're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Balaam is supposed to actually curse Israel, but instead he gives this prophecy that one day he will see a king coming from the line of Israel. This should remind the people of the promise of the one to crush the head of the serpent. But Balaam says, it will take time before this takes place, right? I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. But one day will come one from the line of Judah who will be a king over Israel, who will crush the head of the serpent and undo the effects of sin in the world. Now I want to fast forward pretty far into the book of Isaiah. Isaiah has a number of prophecies about the coming king. This one is from Isaiah 11. And it says, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness also the belt of his waist. So many, many years after this prophecy from Balaam, Isaiah prophesies around 700 BC. He predicts that a descendant will be born from David's family. So it says, there shall come a shoot from the stump of Jesse. Jesse was David's father. So there will come one from David's family, and God will put his spirit on this king, and he will rule justly. Unlike the faithless rulers of Isaiah's time, this king will see God. He will be righteous and faithful. And so Isaiah speaks of the one from David's family now who will come and crush the serpent and undo the effects of sin. Though many generations have passed since Jacob's prophecy of a king coming from Judah, over 800 years, in fact, Isaiah promises that God will be true to his promises. A king would come who would undo the effects of the curse. Our next passage we can see is in Isaiah 42. So as I mentioned, Isaiah has several places where he speaks about the coming king, and we're going to just look at a few of them. So this is Isaiah 42. He says, behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, and from the prison those who sit in darkness. So Isaiah speaks in chapter 9 and 11 about a coming king, but he does not only speak of this coming person as a king, he actually calls him a servant, right? Behold, my servant. He will bring justice to all the nations. Isaiah also predicts that he will bring salvation. He will open eyes that are blind spiritually. He will deliver those who dwell in the darkness of sin. So he will not just rule over the people, but he will deliver them from the bondage to sin, as God promised to Eve so long ago. Eve's descendant will defeat the serpent, enable people to overcome the sin and evil that has infected humankind from the beginning, basically, from Genesis 3, from after Adam and Eve have sinned. But Isaiah goes on to speak about this person in a familiar passage to us that we often read around Easter. This is in Isaiah 53, where he says, surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So Isaiah delivers one of the most surprising elements about this coming king. He will indeed deliver the people from sin, but he will do it in the most surprising way. Through his own death, not through conquest, not through military victory, but through his own death, he will deliver people from sin. This king will conquer, but he will conquer through his death. He will take humanity's sin upon himself. And by taking on that sin, he will take it away from humanity. His affliction would be the way peace and deliverance of sin comes to humanity. So we can see throughout the Old Testament that there are passages that speak about this coming king. From the very beginning, almost from Genesis 3, there's this prediction that one will come who will defeat the serpent, who will defeat the devil, who also defeats sin. And throughout the Old Testament, we continue to have passages that speak about this coming ruler. And we learn more about him, that he will come from Abraham's family, and ultimately he will come from David's line. And he will not just conquer and rule, though he will do that, but he will do it through his own death. He will take humanity's sin on and thereby defeat it. So when Zechariah predicts that God spoke through the mouth of the prophets of old about this coming Messiah, this coming king, we see throughout the Old Testament this theme of one who would come to defeat sin and evil. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas, that Jesus isn't just God who became man, although he is that. He is also one predicted in the Old Testament who would come defeat the sin that has infected humanity since Adam and Eve sinned in the garden.